Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to begin our second day looking at Unit 5.3, the Industrial Revolution begins, and our learning objective is to explain how environmental factors contributed to industrialization from 1750 to 1900. So we're going to do just kind of finish our overview that we'd started in the last video, and I'm going to more or less go over a few things that we'd already covered from the last video and do a little claim development at the end here. All right, so in the last video, we looked at why the Industrial Revolution begins in England. Right? What are the environmental factors that contributed to industrialization there? All right, and we went through and we did a kind of a comparison between China and England. Right, kind of looking at the things that that were uniquely possessed by England that were not so in China. And having done so, it seems to be the kind of the thing that seems to be really different here is this notion of of legal protections of private property, and the accumulation of capital and how it was being accumulated. So those seem to be kind of the primary different things. But it's pretty nuanced. It is pretty nuanced, so I guess I should probably just pop up the chart from last time, just to kind of remind you of that. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. All right, pull up my document reader. All right, so this is the chart that we'd worked on yesterday or in the last video, excuse me. And we looked at these kinds of legal protections, and so this England has this tradition of English common law. Parliament has a history of increasing protections for private property, such as things like the enclosure movement, and also England has a parliamentary representative body in which you will see increasing merchant representation within that legislative body that is making the laws, whereas in China there is no representative body during the Qing era, and their legal codes are largely based on Neo-Confucian Tang legal codes. All right, so there's that, and then we'd gone through access to foreign resources, and we didn't I don't know if I really differentiated this or not, but both have full access to foreign resources. I guess one of the differences here is that England is going out to access them, whereas China has what everybody wants, so everyone came to them. That might be kind of an interesting claim to kind of run with. That's maybe a reason. And then, of course, the accumulation of capital, right? So, in the case of England, we're talking about people, coming there to get things, and of course, so you're gonna be accumulating capital through the sale of those goods. Right? And some are agricultural, like with tea, and some are manufacturing, right? Whereas in the UK, right, a lot of the accumulation capital is taking place through investment. So that's kind of where we left off, right? And kind of just looking at the Industrial Revolution and contextually, what was it, all right? So once you kind of get to that, right, kind of the contextual foundation for the Industrial Revolution, right? So what actually was, or what is the Industrial Revolution, right? So let's kind of run through a few things here, right? One is, we mentioned this in the last video, it is a divergence, right? It is a divergence point in history. Life was one way before, there's this turning point event, Industrial Revolution, and then life is different afterwards, right? So when we talk about, what we're talking about here is before the Industrial Revolution, and for thousands of years, right? 3,000-4,000 years, human society, right, as it was, post-Neolithic Revolution, developed into this kind of fashion where most of the world's population lived in this type of setting. Cities did exist, right, but most people on planet Earth lived in a situation that looked like this. And of course, this will transition very rapidly. So after thousands of years of this. We go to this extremely quickly. Right, so, and of course, when you start talking about a divergence like this, that so dramatically changes life, it's going to have a little complexity to it. So we're just going to start to explore that complexity just a little bit and say that we are transitioning from the cottage industries, right? What is cottage industry referring to? This means most of what you own came from where you lived, right? Within 30, 60 miles of where you lived. Your clothes were made in the cottage in the village. Your shoes are made in the cottage in the village. Right? Your food was produced in the surrounding the village. I mean, this was, there were things that would have come from away, like dyes and whatnot, but for the most part, things were local, right? Small scale, right? And every step of the process was done right there. And so we're seeing that transition from that, right? And to something new. So when we start kind of looking at this, right, this local, right, has an agricultural. So maybe a good place to start with the Industrial Revolution, is textiles, right? So we'll kind of look at that in a second. But also farming and agriculture is also a good place to start with this as well. So without the agricultural innovation that is taking place, it's hard to imagine what we are about to kind of get into. So let's start with that. All right. So what is the Industrial Revolution? It is agricultural. Let me make sure we can see what I'm writing. Agricultural innovation. All right. It is agricultural innovation. And all right, what are we seeing here? Or what are these innovations? I mean, there's a whole list of innovations. So, all right, so let's do a couple of examples real quick here. So examples are, all right, get some lists here. New crop rotation techniques, right? Going from the 3-tier rotation to the 4-tier rotation. Jethro Tull and the seed drill. The enclosure movement, right? So getting, kind of moving away from the commons and enclosing off, right, the landscape, to private ownership. Land reclamation, right? Adding additional lands. Canal systems and irrigation, right? We see as well, and this we can move our crops more profitably. And of course, selective breeding. And of course, the term selective breeding wouldn't have been used in the 1700s because Darwin had not published his book, but that is what we're talking about here, right? So, what are some examples here? All right, we're talking about field rotation, seed drill, seed drill, selective breeding. I'm just going to put etc. Right? And I'll go back to that slide in a second if you want me to add more. Right, and of course, what are the effects of this? Right, what are the effects of this? We're going to see a bunch of effects here, right? One is higher crop animal yields, right? Higher yields, right? And whether you're talking about selective breeding, right, or whether you're talking about more calories being grown per acre. All right. There's something to be said about having, something like a seed drill, which you can set the depth in which the seed will go in order to maximize your potential productivity, right, for that field. All right, there's something to be said about that, right, as opposed to a human going in and doing that. All right, so we're going to see this, right, kind of higher crop, higher yields. And the second major effect that we're going to see from this is a decreased demand for labor. All right, and right, so that's kind of a good place to start, right? The Industrial Revolution, right? This is an integral part of it. Right? There is no Industrial Revolution without these kinds of innovations, and of course, these kinds of things continue to this day, right? We're constantly seeing this kind of innovation, right? And I think I looked it up a couple of years ago, and that the average cow today weighs 16 to 1,800 pounds. As opposed to 840 back in 1786. So, the selective breeding continues. All right, selective breeding continues. All right. Finding a chicken that lays more eggs. All right, so, and I do have a couple of videos on my YouTube page for these if you want to kind of learn about the flying shuttle. But we're also seeing textile innovations, right? So agriculture innovations are a major part, but textile innovations are also a major part. So the traditional way in which cottage industry would produce, stretch their yarn, would be through the spinning wheel. It's an old invention going back a millennia, and this is simply how threads were spun, and we're going to see a number of innovations take place. Of course, the Harsgray's invention in the spinning jenny is going to be probably one of the most important, for kind of moving beyond this. So we see a number of textile innovations. Right? These textile innovations will increasingly scale. Right? So if you're starting in the cottage, the flying shuttle will make it faster to do what you're doing in that cottage industry. The spinning jenny, will very rapidly increase your overall output to the point where if you have a spinning jenny working within your cottage, you're probably going to start having a challenging time getting access to raw materials, right? You're simply going to be pouring through it too fast, right? And as you then consume all the available natural resources, right, you will then begin that process of scaling, kind of growing, scaling up, right? So you will see a continual process of scaling to the point where using humans as your energy source is going to become problematic. So we see here scaling up. We see replacing energy sources from human power to water power to something different. All right, something different. So let's go ahead and let's write down another one. All right. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about textile innovations. All right. So textile innovation. So what is the Industrial Revolution? It's textile innovations. All right. And what are we talking about here? Replacing. All right. Replace cottage industries. All right. So we're replacing the cottage industry. Zoom in on that a little bit. All right. We are replacing the cottage industry, and we have a number of innovations. Right, just as a reminder, what those innovations are. Right, things like the flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, the water frame, etc., etc. All right. Spinning jenny, the water frame, etc. All right, so we see a number of innovations. Those innovations will have an effect. All right, we're going to see a scaling. All right, we're going to see a scaling up, right, and increase production. Right, scaling up of your business models, increase production. Right, so out of the house or cottage, into the factory. Right, so out of the house, going into the factory. And of course, as we scale up, we're going to see an increasing need for labor. Right, an increasing need for labor. And as your labor scales up, you're also going to have a need for increased power sources. Right, for increased power sources. And we are seeing that, right? We are seeing that with the case of the Textile Innovations. Right. And where is my marker? There we go. All right, so what is the Industrial Revolution? It is agricultural innovation. It is textile innovation, right? And it is also energy. Right? Energy innovation. Right? It is also energy innovation. Right? So what is the old? Right? What is the old forms of energy and harnessing of energy? Kind of just looking at this, humans, water, right? These are kind of the old forms, right? So human power, Human, human power, water, animals, draft animals, wind. Wind was often used for grinding of grains or grinding of rice or squeezing sugar cane, so windmills, right? So wind power. So what are the new forms of energy being used? Largely fossil fuel. Right? Largely fossil fuels. Right? Things like coal, natural gas, petroleum, oil. Okay. As you can see it. All right. So these are. Right, this is what the Industrial Revolution is. It's all this. Right. It's all these things, and kind of all working in an interconnected fashion. All right. So when we start talking about, again, how do we how do we interconnect these things? It's all right. So let's take something like what is kind of coming in between here. In between here and here, all right, is a process. Right. That process is known as urban. URB. I can't spell that today. URBANIZATION, urban, urbanization. There we go. All right, so we have this process of urbanization taking place, right? So, there's kind of a couple of major things happening here, right? So let's kind of draw a little arrow, because they are interconnected. All right, so maybe over here on this side, you could say that we have some push factors. All right, we have some push factors, and over here we have some pull factors. All right, so what are we seeing here? We have more food equals more people. All right, more food equals more people. And we're also seeing a decreased demand, right, for agricultural labor. All right, so these would be some kind of push factors pushing people out of the rural parts of the world. And of course, you have your pull factors. All right, so kind of pull factors here, labor demand. Right, labor demand is always going up. All right, so ways to earn a living. Right, if you head over that way. right? Head to the cities, right? As well as a bunch of other pull factors we can deal with later. All right, so we are seeing, right, it's a pretty complex thing, right? When you kind of think about the Industrial Revolution, right? So it's a lot of moving parts, right? So with that all in mind, let's just kind of run through some images that are kind of symbolic of the Industrial Revolution. And what I really want to know, right, as we look at these images is, are you looking at textile innovations, energy innovations, or agricultural innovations? All right. So we're kind of taking these notes and we're applying them out. So this image here, textile innovation, energy innovation, agricultural innovation. So why don't you go ahead and pause it and write down your answer, right? And write down why you think that. All right, so hopefully you took a minute to do that. So in class, when we discuss this, right, we pretty easily come up with all three, right? So obviously this is energy innovation. We're seeing coal, right? Coal power. We're also seeing textile innovation, right? Assuming these are textile mills. Right? That's an assumption that we make. And then you could also say we're seeing the effects of the agricultural innovation as well. It is as a result of the population increase that we see urbanization. And of course, only through increased productivity can we be able to feed these growing cities. So you could easily explain all three as long as you kind of make that explanation, right? At least for this one. Not always the case for all these. Right? So we did the same activity for this one. So if you are at home, please feel free to do this and send me in your responses for this. So I think this is New York City. I think this is a Fulton invention. Right, so Fulton is the inventor of this tech. So go ahead and write what you're going to write, right? And then there's this one. All right, so this is women in a factory. So which one is it? All right, and then we looked at this one. Right, this is a Jacob Riis photograph. Yeah. And then we looked at this one. A little harder to see. So this is a silk factory. Okay. All right, and then we kind of transitioned over to just talk for a few minutes about the spread and the Industrial Revolution. So once you kind of get by the fact that the Industrial Revolution, right, why it begins where it begins, what it is, right, then we'll talk for a few about how it spreads, right, and it spreads initially to the United States. Francis Cabot Lowell. Right, so if you've ever been to Lowell, Massachusetts, right, you may, right, his namesake town, right, but the Industrial Revolution begins in Massachusetts / kind of Rhode Island border of, that Falls Church area, the Falls Church, what's that place called? It's Falls, something Falls. Now we gotta look it up. Fall River. There you go. Almost had to look it up there. Fall River. Just drove through there this summer as well. And so kind of right on that they had Rhode Island, Massachusetts border. So that's where you see the Industrial Revolution take off in the United States. And it's not really corporate espionage when it's just an engineer who's memorizing it and then profiting from that. Not really. Okay. So, but we do see the Industrial Revolution spread, right? To the United States initially, then to Belgium, right? Major steel, right? Belgium becomes known for its steel. And I've driven across Belgium before. It's kind of neat seeing all the little canals that are, that are all over Belgium. Right. So to kind of move that heavy coal and iron in the finished product steel. France got industrialized a little bit late because of the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars. Really after the war, the 1830 Revolution. We're going to start to see France industrialized, and of course Germany. And this was from your homework last night. The Second Industrial Revolution. Germany is going to become the epicenter for the Second Industrial Revolution, coinciding with the United States. Right. So it's really the United States and Germany leading the way for the Second Industrial Revolution. So when we start talking about Second Industrial Revolution, we're talking about things like chemical revolution and steel, Bessemer process, and stuff like that. Right? And when we get back from our winter break, we will talk about the spread of the Industrial Revolution to places like Japan. Right, so the end of the Tokugawa shogunate, the beginning of the Meiji period of Japanese history, also spreading to places like Russia, the Ottoman Empire, China. Right, we're going to see the Industrial Revolution spreading all over the world. All right, so I'm not going to make a separate video for tomorrow, right? But some classes we started this today, and some classes we're going to do this tomorrow. So just to kind of wrap things up, and if you're watching this video for today and tomorrow, this will work for both. All right. So we're going to do some claim writing activities, right? Some thesis writing. Which of the following most directly explains the importance of improved agricultural productivity to the industrialization of economic production in Western Europe in the period 1750 to 1900? Importance of improved agricultural productivity and industrialization. Okay, so what is God, I did some multiple choice questions before we did the claim writing. So go ahead and try to answer this. I'll just give you the answer in a second. All right. Okay, and then explanation, because new agricultural innovations and methods that allowed farmers to produce greater yields, the demand for agricultural labor decrease and unemployed former agricultural workers sought employment in cities. Actually looking at. All right, another question. All right, so this is another like the last one. The industrialization of Great Britain's economy in the mid 18th century and early 19th century is most directly explained by which of the following? All right, so go ahead and read through these, choose one, and I'm going to give you the answer. All right, so Britain had large reserves of coal. All right, so large coal reserves. Right, means fueling these new technological innovations was easy. All right, so this is our thesis writing, our claim writing activity here. So if you are at home, then please submit these answers with your answers from the pictures. All right, so here's a prompt. In the period 1750 to 1900, the economies of numerous states in Europe, North America, and Asia underwent industrialization. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which environmental factors played a role in the process of industrialization when it was brought to Asia, right? Asia. So Asia only for your categories of analysis, right? In your skill application. All right, so that is so that's a prompt. So what we're doing is we're trying to do some claim developments, right? Which means you've got to have some skill application and you've got to have a category of analysis. And I'm going to give you some possible categories of analysis since we're talking about environmental factors. Here are some of the categories of analysis that you could possibly use. All right, so what I want to do is I want to come up with two separate categories of analysis, and I'm going to give you two documents. And I want you to cater your claim, right, your skill-based category of analysis. I want you to cater that to the document that we're looking at, right? So it should be able to be used to answer this, so you should be able to use this document as evidence, right? You should be able to use this document as evidence in a paragraph where you're using this category of analysis as your thesis. Okay. All right. So here we go. So we have a source here. Document 1. It's a Qing Dynasty official, an advocate of domestic reforms, right? And he is writing a memorandum in 1867, right? 1867. So kind of shortly after the Taiping Rebellion, which we have not got to this year, so don't be surprised if you don't know what the Taiping Rebellion is. But it is kind of shortly after that, right? So, and we're also about 20 years, almost 30 years past about 25 years past the first Opium War as well. So, all right, so a little context on just by kind of looking at where and when. All right, what shall we do about telegraphs and railroads? The Qin Dynasty built the Great Wall, and at the time it was considered a disaster, but later generations relied on it. If telegraphs and railroads are built, China will likewise enjoy great benefit from them in the future. Moreover, as the work of constructing them is enormous, it will be quite beneficial to the poor people now. However, a works project, if you would. However, although the foreigners plead with the court to conclude a formal treaty permitting them to begin this work, this absolutely must not be done. Perhaps the government could give its generous permission, but only if Western interests can devise a plan that would guarantee no arable fields, houses, and ancestral graves would be harmed in the least. Otherwise, permission should decidedly not be given. So a development argument evaluates the extent to which environmental factors play a role in the process of industrialization. All right, so just as a kind of a reminder, if you're coming up with a single sentence, just need one sentence, single claim, skill application, right? Cause or effect, similarity or difference, continuity or change, one single side of one of these skills, and a category of analysis. All right. Now, here are some possible category of analysis you could use. All right. So, which one of these might work, and what skill application? Right, what skill application would you add to that to answer that question? So, go ahead and do that, and we're going to do one more. All right. So, here's the next one. So, if you want to work on this now, go ahead and pause. All right. So, here's our second one. All right. So, once again, same prompt. I want a category of analysis in skill application in which you could use this document as evidence to answer this question. So here's a source from the Ottoman government, right, talking about building a railroad from Damascus to Mecca. And this is in 1893, right, 1893. Okay, so, right, kind of post-constitutional Ottoman Empire here. All right, so Constitution has come and gone. Unless, I guess, the Young Turks are influential, if that helps you. Unless an alternative way, other than the Suez Canal controlled by the British, is found to connect the holy cities of Mecca and Medina to the rest of the empire, the Red Sea coast of Arabia might fall prey to the evils of those who strive to overthrow the very foundations of the caliphate. At present, Muslims going on pilgrimage must either use foreign ships where they are subjected to humiliation or travel by camel, a very challenging journey through months of drought. It has become necessary to construct a railway in this region, both to solve these problems and to show the power of the Caliph. The railway has to be built solely by Muslim involvement, by obtaining a huge amount of finance from the Islamic world and recruiting Muslim engineers in its construction. Our Sultan must personally lead this highly significant undertaking. Muslims across the world hold our Sultan in very high regard. Therefore, people of political and economic influence must not hesitate to allocate some of their assets to this cause when they see our Sultan personally leading the initiative. The Ottoman Sultan claimed the title of Caliph of all Muslims. And so the Ottoman Empire, right, and then subsequently after the fall of the end of World War I, Turkey will have a Caliph up until 1924. I think it's 1924 off the top of my head. All right, so that's your second one. So come up with a claim. Come up with a claim about, that would answer this question, that you could use this as evidence. Once again, make sure your claim has skill application, right, and make sure it has a category of analysis. And here are some possible categories of analysis. So write a second sentence. Right, so I'm looking for two sentences. That's what your primary assignment is here. All right, so the Industrial Revolution, and that is all for today. The Industrial Revolution spread from Britain to the rest of Europe and the United States, later spread places like Japan and Russia. As it spread, the global share of manufacturing shifted. Most of the global manufacturing was taking place in South Asia. What is today India and Bangladesh and Pakistan, and that will shift. Right? That will shift as a result of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution depends on new technologies, especially steam engine, right, which uses coal, other sources of energy, and of course, governments use a variety of strategies, from business-friendly policies and little regulation, all the way to direct control in order to facilitate the industrial process. All right, then we will begin to differentiate that as we kind of go through this unit. All right, that is all. Sabriati.